Coups are easily some of the strangest turning points in politics. You have some that collapse before anyone even realizes what's going on, while others succeed and completely flip a nation on its head for decades. The crazy thing is, they don't always need to be massive armies or huge battles to work. I'm Mike with List 25, and these are 25 captivating facts about coups in history. 25. The Shortest Coup. In 1975, Sao Tome and Principe saw one of the shortest coup attempts ever. It lasted only a few hours before falling apart because of some seriously bad planning. A tiny group of soldiers tried to grab a few government buildings, but they figured out pretty quickly that you need more than just momentum to take over a country. They had zero backup from the rest of the military and no support from the public. Once the news got out, Loyalist forces scrambled and regrouped way faster than the plotters expected. By the time the sun went down, they'd already given up and surrendered. 24. The Most Coups. Thailand's politics have basically been a revolving door of military takeovers. Since 1932, there have been over 20 coups, or attempts. So at this point, they're almost a regular part of life rather than some rare emergency. Entire generations have grown up watching governments get tossed out by generals claiming they need to fix corruption or restore order. What's really wild is it's almost like a script. The military takes over, sets up a temporary government, rewrites the constitution, and eventually holds elections, only for the whole cycle to reset a few years later. Over time, this repetition normalized instability. Political parties learned to operate under constant threat. While many countries treat even a single coup as a national trauma, Thailand absorbed them as structural disruptions. The result is a political system where legitimacy is contested at gunpoint repeatedly across decades. 23. A coup started inside a beer hall. The 1923 beer hall putsch in Munich started exactly where the name says, in a packed beer hall full of politicians and people just grabbing a drink. Adolf Hitler and his guys tried to hijack the Bavarian government right then and there, storming the meeting and even firing a shot into the ceiling to announce a national revolution. But the whole thing was a mess, and within days the coup had failed completely. Hitler was arrested and sentenced to prison. On paper, it was a decisive defeat. In reality, it proved far more consequential. The subsequent trial gave Hitler a national platform. Courtroom speeches were reported widely, transforming a fringe agitator into a recognized political figure. While that attempt didn't actually topple the government, it did something worse. It exposed how weak the system really was and put a massive spotlight on extremist ideas. 22. Fax machines helped stop a coup. During the 1991 Soviet coup attempt, a group of hardline officials tried to take down Mikhail Gorbachev, the last leader of the Soviet Union, by cutting him off and seizing the media. They shut down TV stations, took over newspapers, and controlled every official announcement they could. But they missed one huge detail that ended up ruining everything: the office fax machine. While the plotters were busy trying to control the big news outlets, people in government offices and universities were using fax networks to send around calls for resistance. Speeches from Boris Yeltsin were being fired off and copied everywhere, reaching cities that the coup leaders couldn't possibly silence. Basically, information was moving way faster than the censors could keep up with, which completely blew the "we're in charge" vibe they were trying to create. 21. A coup resulting in an assassination. Burkina Faso's 1987 coup stands apart for its speed and finality. On October 15th, soldiers loyal to Blaise Compaoré, then a top military associate and minister of state, moved against President Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary Pan-Africanist leader of Burkina Faso, focused on anti-corruption, self-reliance, and social restructuring. Unlike hesitant or improvised coups, this operation was decisive. Sankara was killed during a council meeting, along with several close allies. There was no prolonged standoff. Within hours, power had shifted entirely. Once Compaoré took the reins, he pretty much trashed Sankara's entire legacy. The assassination changed the whole purpose of the coup. It wasn't just a political move anymore, it was a scar on their history. Sankara was a huge deal far beyond his own borders, and his death shifted how everyone saw that part of the world. 20. Bad weather accidentally triggered a coup. In 1930, the Dominican Republic's political trajectory was altered not by a military blunder, but by a catastrophic weather event. Just 3 weeks after Rafael Trujillo took office as president, the San Zenon hurricane, one of the deadliest in Caribbean history, leveled the capital city of Santo Domingo. While the city lay in ruins and communication lines were severed, Trujillo saw an opportunity to transform a humanitarian crisis into a platform for absolute authority. Right after the storm hit, Trujillo didn't waste any time. He declared martial law, saying the chaos was so bad he needed a heavy hand to keep people from looting. But what he was really doing was grabbing all the relief power for himself. He basically pushed his rivals and the lawmakers to the side, making sure every bit of help went through him and him only. Under the guise of national reconstruction, he began to dissolve the constitutional checks on his power. To the public, he presented himself as the benefactor who rose from the rubble to save the nation. 19. Romantic music played during a coup. During the 2009 coup in Honduras, things got really weird on TV. As soldiers were grabbing control of the media stations, the national channel didn't start broadcasting propaganda or emergency alerts. They just started playing romantic music on a loop. It was surreal. You had people tuning in to see if their government was falling apart, and all they got was love songs. The choice wasn't officially explained. Some speculated it was an attempt to keep the public calm. Others believed technicians defaulted to preloaded programming once command structures collapsed. Whatever the reason, the effect was symbolic. This absence mattered. A large part of a coup is just controlling the narrative. Because these guys didn't communicate, they lost the only window they had to make people believe they were actually in charge. 18. A failed coup still changed history. Japan's 1936 coup attempt, led by young army officers, collapsed within 48 hours. The rebels assassinated senior officials and attempted to seize control of Tokyo, believing they were acting in the service of the emperor. They failed, and the uprising was crushed, with the conspirators executed. The fallout from this was massive. Instead of the government finally putting its foot down with the military, they did the opposite. They started playing nicely and trying to keep them happy. Politicians got way more scared of making the wrong move, and the most extreme guys in the army started calling the shots. People stopped speaking up, terrified of making things even worse. In the end, the coup failed, but it actually sped up Japan's slide into a total dictatorship. 17. A fake film crew tried to launch a coup. Back in 2004, there was this mercenary plot to take over Equatorial Guinea that honestly sounds like a rejected Hollywood script. This ex-SAS officer named Simon Mann led a group of soldiers who tried to dodge security by pretending to be a film crew. They actually landed a Boeing 727 in Zimbabwe with fake papers and equipment crates, basically hoping that being in the movie business would let them move a small army across borders without anyone looking too closely. The whole plan fell apart the second they touched down. Zimbabwean officials had already been tipped off by local intelligence, so they headed straight for the plane. When they opened up the cargo, they didn't find cameras, props, or lighting gear. They found a massive stash of weapons and dozens of hired mercenaries. The movie production was shut down right there on the tarmac, and everyone was arrested before they could even get close to their target. The entire plot closely mirrored the narrative of Frederick Forsyth's 1974 novel The Dogs of War, which detailed a fictional mercenary takeover of a country modeled after Equatorial Guinea and was later adapted into a major motion picture. 16. A university became the final battleground of a coup. The 1971 Bolivian coup was a brutal 3-day conflict that marked the end of a brief era of leftist military rule. President Juan José Torres, known as JJ, had attempted to govern through a People's Assembly, a move that terrified the country's conservative elite and military brass. When the uprising began in the lowland city of Santa Cruz, the momentum was a rapid collapse of government authority in the face of superior firepower. The most dramatic scene occurred at the Higher University of San Andreas in La Paz. Thousands of students and workers, poorly armed but fiercely loyal to Torres, attempted to barricade the streets and defend the university against Banzer's advancing tanks. As a result, the government's military support vanished as high-ranking officers defected to the rebels. The university was shelled, and dozens were killed in a lopsided battle that signaled the coup's success. 15. A prime minister staged a coup against his own president. In 1999, Pakistan's government and military finally hit a breaking point. It was a classic power struggle between the prime minister and the army chief. Tensions had been simmering for months as they fought for control. After the conflict with India in Kargil, Sharif and Musharraf's relationship was basically a ticking time bomb. Sharif decided to act first, dismissing Musharraf while the general was returning from an overseas trip, and ordered that his plane be denied permission to land. The move backfired almost immediately. Senior military commanders rejected the dismissal, seized key infrastructure, and redirected Musharraf's aircraft to Karachi. Airports, television stations, and government buildings were secured within hours. By the time Musharraf landed, the coup was effectively complete, and Sharif was arrested. The second the army chose Musharraf, the government collapsed. Sharif was elected, but in Pakistan, the generals clearly held the real power. 14. A coup split a country into two governments. Libya's 2014 collapse wasn't your typical power grab. Instead of a new leader stepping up, the whole state just fractured. Because of disputed elections and different groups moving in, the country actually ended up with two rival governments at the same time. One was based in Tripoli, the other in Tobruk, and both propped up by their own militias and foreign allies. The split created institutional chaos. Ministries duplicated themselves. Military commands answered to rival authorities. Citizens were caught between overlapping laws, taxes, and security forces. Unlike a traditional coup, there was no clean seizure of power. This whole mess proved that modern coups don't always just swap one leader for another. Sometimes they just break the entire system. 13. The coup of the colonels was shockingly fast. So, get this. In 1967, Greece was taken over before most of the country even had their morning coffee. These mid-ranking officers moved in the early hours to snatch up the politicians and take over the transport networks. Their big secret? They weren't the guys the government was actually worried about. The leadership was keeping an eye on the senior generals, so they were caught completely off guard by this preemptive strike from the lower ranks. By dawn, the whole thing was over, the radio was playing the new government's message, and that was that. There were no prolonged battles or dramatic confrontations. The takeover resembled a drill carried out nationwide. Greece ended up stuck under military rule for the next 7 years. During that time, they basically tossed out everyone's rights and shut down anyone who tried to speak up. It's a perfect example of how a fast surprise move can totally crush a legitimate government if they aren't ready for it. 12. A coup once involved hostages in parliament. In 1981, Spain went through a coup attempt that was literally caught on camera for the whole world to see. It's known as 23F, named after the date it happened, February 23rd, 1981. These armed officers actually stormed into the parliament building right in the middle of a vote, firing shots into the ceiling and taking everyone hostage. Since Spain was still trying to move away from being a dictatorship and toward a democracy, seeing this play out on live TV was a massive shock to the system. For nearly 18 hours, the outcome was uncertain. What ultimately stopped the coup was when King Juan Carlos appeared on television in uniform, affirming support for the constitutional government and ordering the armed forces to stand down. His intervention removed any ambiguity about loyalty, and the coup collapsed soon after. 11. A Roman coup plot was exposed by its own preparations. The Pisonian conspiracy of 65 CE is a perfect example of how pre-game jitters can ruin a coup. A massive group of Roman elite were all set to replace Nero with a guy named Piso, but the plan fell apart at the last second. Why? Because the conspirators started acting super sketchy. One of the leaders, Flavius Scaevinus, started making these frantic last-minute preparations that were so obvious even a casual observer could tell he was planning something suicide-adjacent. He drew up a fresh will, and most suspiciously, handed his favorite dagger to his servant, Milicus, with instructions to sharpen it to a lethal edge. He also ordered the preparation of medical dressings and bandages. Milicus, realizing these were the tools of an assassin and fearing for his own life should the plot fail, took the dagger to Nero's palace and confessed everything. 10. How live TV killed a dictatorship. The downfall of Nicolae Ceausescu, the longtime communist leader of Romania, in 1989 unfolded in front of cameras that were meant to reinforce his authority. During a live televised speech in Bucharest, Ceausescu expected applause and obedience. Instead, the crowd began to boo. The reaction caught him completely off guard, and viewers watched as his confidence visibly cracked in real time. That moment mattered because authoritarian power relies heavily on the illusion of control. Once the audience saw hesitation and confusion, fear broke. Protests spread rapidly across the country, overwhelming security forces that had previously kept dissent contained. Within days, Ceausescu and his wife, who fled by helicopter, were captured and executed after a brief trial. 9. Coded crossword messages helped plot a coup. In the high-stakes lead-up to the Allied invasion of Normandy in 1944, surveillance was so airtight that even the mention of a code name could lead to an arrest. However, security officials were baffled when the most secret details of the invasion began appearing in the Daily Telegraph's morning crossword puzzles. Instead of traditional intelligence leaks, top-secret codenames like Overlord, Neptune, and Utah were being published for all to see. To outsiders, these looked like innocuous clues and answers in a casual word game. To British intelligence, they were a potential catastrophe. MI5 agents were dispatched to investigate the puzzle's creator, who was revealed to be a schoolteacher named Leonard Daw, suspecting that he was part of a resistance cell or an elaborate spy network using wordplay to bypass military censors. Investigators eventually realized the codes were probably just a weird coincidence. They thought maybe Daw's students simply overheard some soldiers talking nearby and thought the word sounded cool for a crossword. But the panic it caused is still a legend in the world of intelligence. 8. A single locked door stopped a coup attempt. During Russia's 1993 constitutional crisis, the rebel lawmakers knew exactly what they needed to do: take over the TV station. In a fight like that, if you aren't on the air, you basically don't exist. They tried to storm the major broadcasting center because they knew that without a way to reach the public, their challenge to Boris Yeltsin didn't have any real weight or authority. It was all about getting their faces on the screen. However, their plans stalled for an unexpectedly simple reason. The entrance was locked and reinforced. 7. A coup succeeded with almost no violence at all. Most coups are violent, but Portugal's 1974 revolution was different. A group of young officers decided to take down the long-standing dictatorship that had been dragging the country through colonial wars for years. The coolest part? There was almost no fighting. Soldiers literally put flowers in their guns as a signal of peace. It's why we call it the Carnation Revolution. It was a complete regime change that used flowers instead of bullets. The public piled into the streets, and it was so overwhelming that the regime couldn't even put up a fight. When the loyalist troops refused to fire, the dictatorship collapsed in under a day. That lack of violence tells you everything you need to know that the government hadn't just lost the people, it had lost its own internal support. By the time the flowers showed up, the regime was already dead on its feet. The coup ended Portugal's colonial conflicts and opened the path to democratic reform. 6. A coup was announced on live radio. Ghana's 1966 coup succeeded because of one thing: perfect timing. While the president was away on a diplomatic trip to Vietnam, the military launched Operation Cold Chop, which was a calculated piece of deception. They used the bureaucracy to their advantage and moved in when his back was turned. They brought a massive column of troops from the interior of the country toward the capital, Accra, under the pretext of a routine military exercise. The primary risk was not a technical slip, but the physical visibility of the troops. The conspirators had to maintain the illusion of a drill until the very moment they reached the gates of Flagstaff House, the presidential residence. When they finally launched the attack, they met stiff resistance from the Presidential Detail Department. However, because the military's command structure had already been subverted from within, loyalist reinforcements were never called. Once the rebels seized the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, Colonel Kotoka took to the airwaves to announce that the myth of Nkrumah was over. 5. A fake message from God sparked a coup. Serbia's 1903 coup was driven by political resentment, but packaged in religious language. King Alexander and Queen Draga had alienated the military and much of the political elite through unpopular decisions, accusations of corruption, and fears that the royal line would be reshaped around the Queen's family. Officers determined that the monarchy had to fall, but they needed the justification strong enough to rally support. To do that, conspirators framed their actions as divinely sanctioned, claiming they were acting on a higher moral calling. By wrapping the whole thing in a religious frame, the plotters basically gave everyone an excuse to go along with it without feeling guilty. The king and queen were actually assassinated right inside the palace, and just like that, the entire Obrenović dynasty was gone overnight. This didn't just change the local government either. It shifted Serbia's alliances in a way that helped set the stage for World War I. 4. Journalists strolled through a coup frontline. During Venezuela's 2002 coup attempt against President Hugo Chavez, confusion spread faster than control. Authorities shifted repeatedly over the course of days, with military units, political leaders, and broadcasters unsure who was actually in charge. In the middle of this uncertainty, foreign journalists found themselves walking through areas that should have been sealed military zones. At one point, reporters passed through the presidential palace courtyard with little resistance. Soldiers on duty weren't certain which faction the journalists belonged to or which orders still applied. The absence of a clear command created gaps where no one wanted to make a decisive call. The coup itself collapsed after Chavez returned to power. The journalists later described the experience as surreal, not because of violence, but because of how little direction existed. 3. A coup created one of Africa's longest dictatorships. Mobutu Sese Seko's 30-year reign started with a 1965 coup that was all about the right timing. With the Cold War heating up, foreign governments were willing to support almost anyone who promised stability. Mobutu stepped into that gap, and because he had international players in his corner, he was able to consolidate power almost overnight. He basically traded predictability for a blank check to run the country however he wanted. Once Mobutu was locked in, he basically turned the entire country into a one-man show. He even renamed the whole place Zaire and started these massive loyalty campaigns to make sure everyone knew who the boss was. He funneled all the wealth to himself and made sure any institutions that were left were just there to do his bidding. If you tried to stand up to him, you were either intimidated into silence or kicked out of the country. Usually these things don't last 30 years, but Mobutu managed to keep the country in a state of total stagnation for a generation. When everything finally collapsed in the 90s, there was almost nothing left to build on. 2. A Fiji coup claimed to protect Indigenous rights. So, imagine a coup where the army isn't even the one in charge. That's what happened in Fiji in 2000. George Speight, a civilian, led an armed group into the parliament building and just took the government hostage. He justified the whole thing by saying he was defending indigenous Fijian rights against a government that was threatening their traditions. Speight's excuse definitely found an audience, but he was basically winging the rest of the operation. As negotiations continued, the country simply stopped. In the end, the military had to intervene to stop the bleeding. They cleared out the parliament, freed the hostages, and hauled Spade off to jail. It was a messy end to a completely unorganized power grab. 1. A coup failed because nobody took it seriously. Venezuela's 1961 coup attempt fell apart almost immediately. Not because of some huge battle, but because it just wasn't believable. A tiny group of officers announced they were taking over, making these big dramatic speeches without actually getting anyone on their side. Major military bases simply ignored them. Regular people went about their business. The government stayed totally cool, treating the whole mess as a minor nuisance. Without any fear, the movement never moved. The plotters gave up within hours, realizing that power is about being recognized as much as using force. This flop proves that authority is all about performance. Saying you're in charge is worthless if no one buys it. Successful coups have to convince the army and the public that fighting back is pointless. And there you have it. 25 captivating facts about coups in history. Some ended in hours. Others changed entire regions for decades. And none of them unfolded the way anyone expected. If you're not done yet, check out our video on 25 darkest moments in history we can all learn from. The link should be appearing right about here. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, like, share, comment, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I'll catch you again next time.